do that on most bad
Hello!
Yes!
We'll begin. We're in Isaiah chapter 7, right?
Oh, 7?
So,
Okay.
6. Thank
Okay.
you.
Back at the
One thing I just want to bring up
One page
about
back
the
on this
book of
one.
Isaiah in general,
There we are.
it's a very, very well read Old Testament book. There's a lot that we see Jesus in, and we're going to read some of that today. But as we saw, the year King Uzziah died is 738 BCE. But the events that take place over the course of Isaiah go all the way to the 500s.
Oh.
Meaning it was more than one Isaiah that is collected in this book. It's considered 3 Isaiahs because it takes place at 3 different periods of time. And there's a similar tone, and it's kind of both warning and comfort. And so we're hearing from 3 different voices.
It's like there were multiple prophets who were globbed together to create this one.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if all 3 of them were called Isaiah or if that's just how it worked, but the very end, is coming back from the exile. So this famous "Prepare the Royal Highway," kind of every valley shall be lifted and blah blah blah, is speaking about the coming back from exile, and that's in the 500s. So we have quite a stretch of time period that goes on in this book.
500s BC or
Yeah.
AD? Oh, okay, so
BC.
a couple hundred years.
Yeah. But we'll start at chapter 6. The other thing I'll say is there is a lot of just what feels like poetry of prophecy in this book. Just a little bit of narrative. And we're going to read some of that narrative and talk about that. But then if you flipped through, you're going to see a little bit of narrative and then just tons of poetry and prophecy, which is what makes it not necessarily a book that you would read through like a story. So, who would like to read chapter 6, the whole chapter?
I can read it.
Okay.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And each one called to one another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. And he said, Go and say to this people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, and stop their ears, and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and comprehend with their minds, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate. Until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a 10th part remain in it, it would burn again, like a terebinth thorn oak, whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. That's dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is a terebinth?
Yeah.
It's
That
like
kind of tree. I suppose it's one that had really strong wood, so if you cut it down, it was just going to be there. It must have really deep roots or something.
Why did they need to cover their faces and feet with their wings? Or why are they doing that? The seraphs.
Is it a modesty thing?
Protect themselves from the glory of God.
Oh.
That's what I have here.
Oh.
He's too glorious to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a lot of this is some of these visions can be very metaphorical, And this is why I always get annoyed when people say biblically accurate angels. And then they draw like a being with all these wings and eyes everywhere, you know, from Revelation. Eyes were symbolic of wisdom. And wings obviously are symbolism as well. And so it's funny what we decide to take literally. And here we have, you know, other beings all together.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh, it's a bit, I don't know. That's just my church nerd irritation is the biblically accurate. I'm like, plus a seraph and a cherubim were other beings. And, which I learned to my horror this week, that seraphs is the same name as the fiery serpent in Numbers that came and bit all of the people. So the word
really
seraph is the cobra that lived in the desert at that time. Therefore, these are, yes, flying cobras.
But yeah, they had feet apparently.
Which have feet.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe think of Quetzalcoatl
dragon.
from
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I'll say is like there was a time, especially before this, but in this area, of the cobras were seen as beings of wisdom. I mean, you see Athena, and what's beside her? A cobra. There's quite a few images of the snake and the cobra as being positive, as being a representation of wisdom and even intuition. And in the specifically Christian tradition, we've demonized the snake. And so this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, but it's sort of a remnant of a time where that was not seen to be the case. Yes, they were dangerous. Yes, they could kill you. But there is a level of respect of their power, too, that might have been.
They had a
Sort
lot
of
of
like the,
Egyptian influence too, and there's a lot of cobras
Yes,
in Egyptian.
exactly.
And they're not demonized in
Nope.
Egypt at all.
Exactly.
They're holy symbols
Exactly.
and kingly symbols.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned wisdom too. I was thinking of the serpents on the medical symbology, the staff and the two serpents
Yeah.
coming together.
Yep. Exactly.
That one's actually a different symbol. I can tell about that later. It
Okay.
has a different origin. The two serpents is a different origin than the one serpent.
Really?
Yeah, with the wings on it.
Okay.
Cool.
That comes from Greek mythology.
Anyway, it's a digression
Yeah.
too.
Cool.
So we talked about the angel or the seraphs protecting their faces and feet from the glory of God, and
All this about tell the people to be listening but do not comprehend, keep looking but do not understand, like ordering them to be stupid.
yes,
I
Deaf
know, it
and
is
dumb.
almost like an
Yeah.
order.
it's like pay no attention to the any wisdom that you might think you're comprehending to, and just get out of this land until it's no longer inhabited, where everything is just are just ghost towns and desolation. It's like, dude.
And don't get it until until Lord sends everyone far, but they must be talking about the Babylonian captivity.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Which
You'll
is a long...
get it after everything sucks.
Right. It's a long journey. It's a couple hundred years almost, or 150 years of a bad time.
Talk about a hard reboot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about this a lot in terms of it's not as if God is saying, I'm putting a spell on you so that you don't understand. It's not like that. In some ways, it could be just descriptive of the fact that, you know, someone's speaking truth to your face, but you refuse to hear it. And I think about now how that is happening and just the weird lies that don't seem to make any sense that are happening. Like,
Good point.
anyone with any rationality should be able to point out the fact that you're not going to send a third grader to school and have a school with the budget and the resources and the desire to change your child's gender medically and then send them back to school the next day, right? But these are some of the weird lies and misinformation that people are believing. And that's what I think about with this. We all can fall prey to things, right? All of us. We're not special. But when we actually do take a moment to pause and say, I will not blindly believe anybody, and I'm going to just check and listen, that's helpful. But I'm thinking that in this time there must have been some of that too. There must have been people who were sharing misinformation, whether it was everything's fine, go home, or everything's terrible, listen to me, right? There's always people who, for purposes of power, will say things, and there's a large swath of people who are just going to believe it. And here he is coming to maybe say something very different from what the powers that be are going to say, and a lot of people are not going to believe him. And I think that's maybe where the power of this is like Jesus and other people is, whether people listen to me or not, I have to say it. And that there's going to always in every culture and time, a large group of people who don't want to look deeper than what they're being told.
That is something.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And you're right, that is like a universal thing,
Yeah.
and it's always good. That's a part of human nature.
Yeah.
Because it's always hard to tell what's true and when we're being had. And the
Well-
person who's telling us misinformation isn't necessarily trying to lead us on either. They don't necessarily know they're telling us misinformation.
Yep.
Sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. People share something on Facebook that they're like, oh no, and they share it without checking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how it spreads.
And what about this last line? The holy seed is its stump.
So the stump refers to the family tree of King David being cut off. So the holy seed is maybe another metaphor for that Messiah that's going to come from that.
Okay.
Because wasn't there something about the shoot of Jesse?
Yes,
Or- yeah.
exactly.
Okay, same idea.
Same idea.
So that's fine.
Well, should we do chapter 7?
Yeah.
Me? In the days of Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, went up to attack Jerusalem, but could not mount an attack against it. When the house of David heard that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of the people shook, as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool, on the highway to the fuller's field, and say to him, Take heed, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Because Aram, with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah, has plotted evil against you, saying, Let us go up against Judah and cut off Jerusalem, and conquer it for ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king in it. Therefore thus says the Lord God, It shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass, for the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered, no longer a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you do not stand firm in faith, you shall not stand at all. Okay, none of that made any sense to me. Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol, or high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. Then Isaiah said, Hear then, O house of David. Is it too little for you to weary mortals, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child, and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land before whose two kings you are in dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring on you and your people and on your ancestral house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. On that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the sources of the streams of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they will all come and settle in the steep ravines, and in the clefts of the rocks, and on all the thorn bushes, and on all the pastures. On that day, the Lord will shave with a razor hired beyond the river with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it will take off the beard as well. On that day, one will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep, and will eat curds because of the abundance of milk that they give. For everyone that is left in the land shall eat curds and honey. On that day, every place where there used to be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver will become briars and thorns. With bow and arrows, one will go there. For all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills that used to be hoed with a hoe, you will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place where cattle are let loose and where sheep tread. That's one of the weirdest chapters I've ever read.
That's kind of bad.
There's definitely a lot of metaphorical imagery in here. Like, the Lord will shave with a razor hired beyond the river. That's got to be a metaphor for another army coming in.
Yeah.
And
Or even mercenaries.
and the bit with the fly and the bee, clearly those are different tribes.
Yeah, so to keep it simple, without going into like all the big details, so you have Ahaz, who's part of the remnant from David, and then you have these 2 other tribes which are aligning to fight against him, and he's afraid. And Isaiah is saying, don't be afraid. By the time, if a woman is pregnant now, by the time that child is 2 to 3 years old, when it's weaned and can choose good from evil, these tribes that are threatening you, it'll be over. And it'll be barren. So that's actually the original understanding of, look, a young woman shall conceive with a son and his name will be Emmanuel. Just was literally saying, if a woman walked by you now and like was pregnant, by the time her child is 2 to 3 years old, this problem will be over.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
Right?
So,
And that's another symbol of like the child's name being Emmanuel, just as saying, don't forget that God is with you. Like, even though things seem really, really bad, God is with you. So that's the original meaning of this passage.
Time, literally, in this time. They're all going to be dead in 3 years anyway, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, like the threat will be over.
The war is going
you
to
know.
be end.
Yeah.
This imminent war.
Yeah. God is protecting you. God is with you.
But I know I've read elsewhere that in the time of Jesus, people were reinterpreting this to mean that there was going to be a Messiah born then, and that there were signs saying that there is a Messiah going to be born now, and hey, he could be named Emmanuel, and so Emmanuel is becoming a very popular name for baby boys. And so
Well-
there are tax records of a lot of babies being named that.
Yeah.
So Matthew.
Also, a fair number of babies named variants of Jesus,
Yeah.
or the Hebrew equivalent.
Matthew was one of the Gospels who really, really thought it was important to prove that Jesus was the Messiah to the Jewish community. And so he would quote passages from the Hebrew scriptures to prove that. And so he's the one who says, all this took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the Lord through the prophet. Look, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from his sleep, he did as the angel commanded. So it's really Matthew that is one of the people that we can basically say made us look at these passages. And he was using them as proof texts. And it is what it is, but it's probably also not necessarily what we would do now. It was a certain kind of use of the scripture, which I can't remember all the details about it, but yeah. And I don't mean that was wrong, but I will say that like when we read these passages, and we're going to read more passages coming up soon that are often used in Advent to point towards Jesus. Why would Isaiah say them, and why would they be recorded if they meant nothing to the people at the time?
Yeah.
It must have meant a lot to them.
Exactly. And so things can mean more than one thing. It's like the book of Revelation when people insist that the book of Revelation is meaningless, but they've cracked the code. They've figured it out and it's for now, right? The book of Revelation, if it has meaning, is for every time. It meant something to the original people who heard it, and it means something throughout time. To just say, this entire book has no meaning except what I've discovered for our time is incredibly like hubris, right? It's very lofty to say. So to say that this scripture, as some people have insisted, that Isaiah didn't know what he was talking about, that he was just saying things, planting a seed, that here we are, the brilliant people hundreds of years later going, that was about Jesus. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
just believe that the writings made sense to the people and they had something to say to the people. And they can have an additional meaning later as well.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And certainly Matthew wasn't. My only point was that Matthew was certainly not the only person who was reading it that way.
right.
And there are definitely a lot of other
Oh,
people
yeah.
read it that way.
Or using scripture like that,
Yeah.
in that
It
way
was a
of,
whole thing.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Who wants to read 8?
I can do it. Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in common characters belonging to Meher Shalal Hashbaz, and have it attested for me to be by reliable witnesses, but the priest of Uriah and Zechariah, son of Jeberechiah. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Meher Shalal Hashbaz, for before the child knows how to call my father and my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Assyria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently and melt in fear before Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore the Lord is bringing up against it a mighty flood waters of the river, the king of Assyria and all his glory. It shall rise above all its channels and overflow all its banks. It will sweep on into Judah as a flood, and pouring over, it will reach up to the neck, as its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Band together, you peoples, and be dismayed. Listen, all you far countries. Gird yourselves and be dismayed. Gird yourselves and be dismayed. Take counsel together, but it shall be brought to naught. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. For the Lord spoke thus to me while his land was strong upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of his people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what it fears, or be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you regard as holy, let him be your fear, let him be your dread. He will become a sanctuary, a stone one strikes against. For both houses of Israel he will become a rock one stumbles over, a trap and snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble, they shall fall and be broken, they shall be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. See, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells in Mount Zion. Now, if people say to you, consult the ghosts and the familiar spirits that chirp and murder, should not a people consult their gods, the dead on behalf of the living, for teaching and for instruction? Surely those who speak like this will have no dawn. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. When they are hungry, they will be enraged and will curse their king and their gods. They will turn their faces upward, or they will look to the earth, but they will see only distress and darkness, the gloom and anguish, and they will be thrust into the thick of darkness. Wow, that was dark.
That was dark.
Yeah.
A lot of it sounds like he's working. Again, a lot of it sounds like God's working against Israel at this point.
Yeah, these are why I never managed to spend much time in the Old Testament. It's like,
Yeah.
what? What are we doing?
Yeah, New Testament usually sounds a lot more optimistic.
Yeah. This is while God was still very angry and before he seemed to get his empathy for the people he created.
Yeah, that's definitely how it feels. It's a really interesting thing about the sometimes difference between Old and New Testament and the way people understand it. And part of it is that the Hebrew scriptures were written by the Jewish people. And the New Testament was written by Christians who were also very influenced by the Greek culture, and it was starting to be a very different culture, and it was based off of Jesus. So, and a lot of these stories happened hundreds, if not thousands of years before Jesus was alive. So the culture was shifting from nomadic to, by the time Jesus was born, metropolis cities and big trades. And so it's a real shift in culture and the understanding of God. And as I mentioned before, in the New Testament, there was an understanding of Satan or evil forces that aren't necessarily God's imminent will. Whereas in the Old Testament, there wasn't that. So anything bad that happened to a people that God said that God loved, there must be a reason. And if God is just, then they must justly deserve this. And that's a lot of what's happening in here is this just deep theology that all of the power resides in God. And everything that happens is in God's control. Therefore, we just have to discern what the heck is going on. And if God is hiding God's face from us, we are being reprimanded for something. But as we continue to read, it's like on the one hand, it's the woe to you, you will be crushed. And then when you're crushed, okay, God comes back and lifts you up. Comfort my people, thus says the Lord. And that was how they understood it. It made sense to them, and it's different in the way we view. It's just different in the way we view it. So I don't think God changed. The way the people writing the scripture have a very different viewpoint of who God is and how God works.
The conception of God definitely changed.
Yeah.
It's like the Old Testament, they have this conception of God who's actually, I hesitate to use the word imperfect, but they have this idea of a God who can change his mind, who can lose his temper, and feel remorse for that. And that definitely doesn't seem to happen in the New Testament, where you have a God who has this plan for things. He's like, this. And I definitely was planning this a long time ago, instead of sort of flying by the seat of his pants in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And sort of the way time seems to flow in the Old Testament seems to be different than in the New Testament. It's much more linear in the New Testament than in the Old Testament, it seems. Which some of that might also just be the way the Old Testament was compiled, of coming out of an oral tradition to eventually getting written down. Whereas the New Testament was written down almost as it was created, which definitely was not the case with the Old Testament.
No.
Which probably also influenced that sense of time.
Yeah.
You know, if something's going to spend a long time being handed down verbally, it's going to be a little muddled.
I don't know a lot about the Jewish faith, like in modern times, but do they still have that concept of God punishes us when we do wrong? Or do you think they have more of like a good and evil
It's a very good question.
in their theology now?
I really have to look that up.
Okay, I
And
just
I'd
am
have to
curious,
ask.
because if they're still waiting for the Messiah,
Yep.
it changes everything. I'm
I've known
curious
some
about it.
Jews, and I gotta say, it depends on which Jews you ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think that's
There's a wide range of
fair. Yep.
Jewish sites.
That's about as fair as talking to two Christians.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
There
very
are
different.
Christians who think that if something bad happened to you,
That's
that
true.
you deserved it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
So-
absolutely right.
So you get a very different answer from some of the more liberal Jews versus an Orthodox Hasidic Jew.
Sure.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sorry. Just thinking of the liberal versus conservative people in faith, it spills right over to the liberal versus conservative aspects in politics. And
Oh yeah, very much so.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your sermon was perfect for that.
Oh,
Yes.
This
Oh.
is going to be a tough week,
Yeah.
like a really tough week.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And maybe we're being prepared and whatever. We just listen, move on, and see what we can do in the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I
Trying to
mean,
understand each other better.
what keeps coming to me is like when the rubber hits the road, that's when you reveal what you really believe. Faith stops being a mental construct and it starts to be something that you live and breathe and act out. And so I mean, that's where you see beautiful examples of people who hid the Jews, right? People
Mhm.
who risk their life today to blow whistles and to share information, and then they just magically disappear, commit suicide, right? Like there's people who they know what could happen to them if they do what they're doing. But something gives them the courage to say, I know something bad's going to happen to me. I mean, that's exactly what Jesus did. I know something bad's going to happen to me, but I have to do what I have to do. And where that courage and calm, the peace that doesn't make any sense, right? The peace that passes all understanding, does descend on people. And for reasons they can't articulate, they're like, I'm okay. I might be killed tomorrow, but I'm still going to do what I have to do because that's more important. And to me, that's like the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal of humanity. That's the goal of religion. That's the goal of everything, is when you're so aligned with God's will and integrity that you literally are, your will is my will. Whatever you want, I'm going to do. Whatever happens, I'm safe in you. Is like, that's everything. And when I actually see people who enact that out in real life, I'm just amazed.
You know, I agree, but that's what we have to be constantly praying to the Lord for, is so that He can use us for His will, because we can't do that on our own, not even close. You know, and we just got to pray and pray. You use me when that opportunity comes. Use me, you know,
Yes.
and use me to look for this stuff, you know, and we can't do it on our own. We have to be praying that the Lord keeps using us in that. I don't know right from wrong. I don't know squat. You know, I'm so lost all the time. And you just have to continue to pray that He uses you.
Yeah.
It's my new thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, our faith and our spiritual practices in some ways should be putting all the kindling in place. Slowly, like by saying, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your will is my will. Just whatever spiritual practices we're doing are creating the kindling, and then the right time comes, there's enough for God to set fire. So if we don't set the kindling, maybe God can still put a fire, but it might not be as big, right? I think about why those 4 people in the book that I shared today. Why those 4 people? And those angels were preparing a kindling in them, and I thought, God could have been talking to the whole planet. And maybe there are messages happening in various places. There's the story of Corrie ten Boom and lots of other people who definitely felt God's presence in the midst of a horrible time. But there are all sorts of other people who maybe didn't, and that's not their fault.
Mm-mm.
It's not their fault, but I am wondering if, like, if God is talking all the time to all of us, all the time, but sometimes we're running around too much, we've got our own agendas, we've got our own ideas, and we haven't practiced getting quiet, getting calm, in order for when the time is right, we hear it. And again, it's not fault, it's not blame, it's not judgment. That doesn't help. That doesn't help.
Yeah.
It's not about that. But yeah,
I think it's a watchful eye and a seeking.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. How are we doing? Oh, I think we're pretty much at the end. I just want to point out that on chapter 9 is the next, like, famous thing. Verse 2, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light is shined.
Yeah, that's a classic line.
Yeah, down to verse 6. A child has been born, a son given. Authority rests on his shoulders, and he's named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God,
Counselor.
Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall go continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. I mean, again, this has been used to refer to Jesus. And it meant something to the people in that time.
Yeah.
What's endless
Which
peace?
is what?
Right?
Yeah, that piece didn't. I mean, during his time and whoever's time it was before then.
That's a good question. What does it mean then? If obviously war still happened,
Yeah.
I guess
peace and
endless
path with
peace
all
is something
understanding.
that we can try to pray to find in Jesus.
Who else would this child be? Who would it have been to them? For a child has been born to us, a son given.
You know what? That's what it is.
The only note I have here is the divine birth or adoption of a king was announced on his coronation day using the words Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These were names given to Egyptian kings at their ascension.
Oh, so it could
Oh.
have just been a king was born.
Standard language of the time for kings,
Could have been.
which would be explain again why they would use it for Messiah
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
Since the Messiah
Yeah.
was supposed to be a king.
But
Or
what you
treated
just
king.
said about endless peace, are we waiting over and over again for God to give us external peace and then we'll be okay?
Yeah.
And what if the message of Jesus this whole time was the endless peace starts here? It's not outward goes to inward, it's inward goes to outward.
Okay, one last thing. If we had endless peace, we wouldn't
I
need
see
God.
that.
So,
Endless external peace. We
Yeah.
wouldn't have to search for God.
right.
Yeah.
Maybe he
And
just wants to retire.
we just, we would be we'd just be expecting it. We'd look for it in other things. We wouldn't have this need that. And so maybe all this stuff is God's way of allowing us to keep grabbing towards Him. And that, so, yeah, endless peace to me, perfect, sounds like the worst thing that could happen to me.
Or maybe it's
It's something I want, but to me it sounds like that way I traded it in, and I don't want to be that person.
What if
Okay.
it's not so much we don't need God, but by that point we've become one with Him?
I need time on that. I need.
Just a
but-
thought that came to
yeah,
mind.
but
Not sure what it means.
I don't know. I just, if the nature of people,
Yeah.
I don't think the nature of people can go that way.
Right. Well, that's why
Right now.
I was wondering. Maybe if
I don't know.
the only way to get there.
Well, I don't know. Well,
All right, good.